Let's talk all about my novel, Seventh Virtue. So if you're new to this channel, I've been writing a contemporary fantasy novel for about 2 years now, which is called Seventh Virtue. And I actually finished the draft just a couple of weeks ago. So now I get to tell you all about the project. Before we get into this video, check out the description for a full list of content warnings. So here's the basic info for the project. The word count is currently at around 200,000 words. I know it's very long. Technically, it's about 198. It is book 1 of the Seventh Virtue series. I'm not sure how long the series itself will be. Honestly, it seems like it's gonna span forever. The sequel is being planned. I haven't revealed the title yet on this channel, but the acronym for the sequel is SG. It is a contemporary fantasy AU of a series that I've been writing for a very long time. Video linked in the description if you'd like to learn more about that universe, which is called the Fostered Verse. Seventh Virtue is not canon at all, unlike all of the other elements of the series that really closely stick to the original plot. I wanted to write something with the same characters, the same situations, but in a completely different world. This is the first time the series has ever had magic, so it's a lot of fun. The point of view is third person present tense, and it's split between 2 main characters. The first and the main character is Harrison. I talk about him a lot on this channel because he shows up in an abundance of my projects, but Seventh Virtue is mostly narrated by him. Alongside him, it's also narrated by Reeve. She has 14 chapters, though it's kind of technically 16, and then the rest are Harrison's, and there are 46 chapters in the book. The genre is contemporary fantasy, and the category is adult fiction. It's also sort of satire-y at times, it's also romance at times, and it's also literary fiction at times. I've described this before as Harrison at one moment is Achilles lamenting the death of Patroclus, and the next moment he's making Cheetah Girls references, so do with that information what you will. It's a mishmash of everything that I enjoy because it's just for me, which leads me to publication status. No, I'm not going to publish this book, especially not in the iteration that it is right now. It's everything that I love in one space. It's pop culture-y, it's also philosophical, it's a strange mishmash of everything that makes up my personality. The setting of Seventh Virtue is in New York in the US. I am not American, so that has been fun to write. It takes place, some of it in Manhattan and then some of it in Buffalo. So here's the plot summary, which I so kindly wrote out, and I think it turned out relatively accurate. 25-year-old Harrison Frost has never wanted to save anyone. After his mother vanishes following an altercation he largely blames on his ex-boyfriend Lonan, Harrison moves to the past with one goal in tow: forget all about him. But when he begins having fiery nightmares of Lonan, he reluctantly seeks a magical cure from Lonan's sister, Reeve, whose explanation for his ailment is as dire as it is puzzling. She reveals she and Lonan are members of the Seventh Roost, one of 7 magical families that coincide with the 7 holy virtues and 7 capital sins. And worse, Lonan is part virtue, the immortal bird that represents each house, and he's transferred half his magic to Harrison in attempts to protect him from their tyrannical family. The same family that is now holding him captive in hopes of remerging him and their virtue, Humilitas, back together. With an unexpected target now on Harrison's back, he partners with Reeve to find Humilitas before the Seventh Roost can. But as she tends wounds from a past she narrowly escaped, wounds that are catching up with her, Harrison must decide if he's ready to rekindle relationships he left behind to save someone he once loved. Will he do it? Yeah, he does it. Like, it's the whole point. But this book is really Harrison and Reeve's novel. I mean, there's a lot of an emphasis on Lonan, but like, forget about him. We don't care about him right now. This is really the besties story. Harrison and Reeve have been characters that I've been writing for a very long time. I brainstormed them at the same time when I was 13. I'm 21 now. They have followed me through many books. It's over 10 at this point. And I was actually very thrilled to give them a story, a besties story, because they've never actually had that. We have Lonan and Harrison getting their own story in Moth, Work, and Feeding Habits, but we've never actually seen Harrison and Reeve do it, so it was nice to give them their own space. So the aesthetic for Seventh Virtue is a whole bunch of things. I've narrowed it down to candles burned to the stump, indigo raven feathers, early 2000s pop, snowy woods at blue hour, dawn fog, a bloody lip, the clatter of city traffic, the singe of gasoline, and I would also like to add those little like lip gloss things that you would get like from toy stores or whatever back in the 2000s that were like shaped as cell phones, and they were rhinestone, and they had like, you know, the really crappy lip gloss on the inside that was glittery. Also that. So comp titles, I was so funny, and I'll talk about this in the history, but since about 2018, I have been pitching this book as Shrek 4 meets Howl's Moving Castle, and it's still very accurate, I would say. So now let's talk about the project history. So when did I start writing Seventh Virtue? I started writing this book in May of 2021, and it took me until March of 2023 to actually finish the first draft. It's a very long first draft, so 2 years, I'm feeling pretty good about that pace. I started this book as a challenge to write 10,000 words in one day. I didn't think I was actually going to finish Seventh Virtue. It was literally just a challenge. I made that challenge for myself because I was desperate to break free from perfectionism, and I have an entire writing vlog of me actually doing this, so you can watch me go through the first 10K of this book. So why did I write Seventh Virtue? Well, this idea, like I said, started as a seed back in 2018. My sister and I were revamping one of her like old fantasy books, and it kind of got some wheels turning in my mind, and I eventually brainstormed a project that I called Fostered But It's Magic for a really long time before I titled the book Seventh Virtue. I had a very general idea about what Seventh Virtue would be about. I knew Lonan would be a birdman. I also knew that him and Harrison hadn't spoken in 2 years, that the breakup was messy, and I also had an idea that Harrison would have to be the one to save him after some time of not being in a relationship at all. Another idea that is the same from the 2018 little nugget was that Reeve ran a con shop, basically, where she scammed people by using magical remedies, and that's the same in the book. I didn't think I was gonna write this book when I started brainstorming it. Looking back, it's crazy how far this project has spanned in my life. I was a literary fiction girly at the time, back in 2018, 2019, and I mean that in the way where I was very stubborn about writing genre fiction. I was a snob, and I really didn't want to write anything else besides literary, and that was fine. I mean, it was a big part of my development as a writer. I love literary fiction, and I still write it now, but it was only in 2021, after I watched the first season of Shadow and Bone, that I felt very inclined to actually write fantasy, because I was very enthralled by the genre. I also later watched Cursed, which is on Netflix too, and that was a huge inspo. I was like, I have to write my own fantasy because I find this really, really fun, and I was never a fantasy reader or writer growing up. I've barely read fantasy, and I have never written fantasy before this book. So I needed a title because I can't write things without titles, and I was going through my title list, and I'd seen the title Seventh Virtue in my list, and funnily enough, Seventh Virtue was actually the original title of Chapter 5 in Feeding Habits, which is basically like the literary fiction version of Seventh Virtue that I ended up changing to a different title, so I'd had it still saved in my document. It sounded the most fantasy, so then I created the entire book around those 2 words alone, which I'll talk about later. So how long did it take to write Seventh Virtue? Well, I drafted it consistently from May to August of 2021. From September 2021 to about March 2022, I took a long break because I was in my 3rd year of my writing degree, and it was so hard that I couldn't write any of my own work. But then I resumed drafting in April of 2022, and I wrote consistently until March of 2023. I also did NaNoWriMo in November of 2022 when I won, so I wrote a lot in November. So the world and magic system. This is for the person who was like, I'm very confused about the magic system in your book. Can you explain it? Well, here we go. In Seventh Virtue, there are 7 magical families. In this book, we only really explore 3, and we only actually explore 2 very in depth. Each magical family has 1 holy virtue and the matching capital sin. Each family also has a general theme for their magic, and within that family, everybody has a different ability. And all of those abilities fall under that theme. So this is just a quick breakdown. The first roost is chastity/lust, which is mirror magic, which I don't know, might change. If any of these become more relevant, all of this is up in the air if I need to change something for plot reasons. The second roost is temperance/gluttony, which is sound magic. The third roost is charity or greed, which is imaging, and they're relevant because a character, Darren, is from the third roost, so we'll talk more about him later. The fourth roost is diligence/sloth, which is time magic, and one of the main characters, Foster, is from that roost. It's not as relevant because he's the only one really left in the fourth roost, so we don't really talk about it much in this book. It'll be a book 2 thing though. And then the fifth roost is kindness/envy, which is telekinesis. Sixth roost is patience/wrath, which is healing, which is kind of relevant in the book 2. And then seventh roost, obviously the most relevant, is humility/pride, pride, and that is like mentalism-ish, like anything in that family. It's quite vague and it's quite eclectic of a magic system. It's not very rigid in terms of its rules. So an example of that is that the seventh roost, of course, humility and pride. Then we have a member of the seventh roost who is Lonan, who we'll talk about in a second, and his ability is something to do with dream walking. It's quite vague. You'd think I would know, but I don't. Taking place in modern America, the magical members of all seven roosts coexist with everyday humans. Magic isn't a secret in general society, though non-roost members live typical 9-to-5 lives and have accepted the seven roosts as a normal part of their society. However, the seven roosts usually live secluded from the modern world because that was easier for Rachel to write, typically in remote areas of the US where they reside together in large houses. Some roost members, like Reeve, have abandoned their families in favor of independent lives. Let's talk about the seventh roost. Well, the seventh roost is the family that's at the heart of this book, of course. They are headed by the seventh virtue, which is an immortal bird. Now, we'll talk about the virtues in just a second, but it's kind of like a raven-like bird, and I think of it like the family's coat of arms. It's the head of the family, the symbol of a family. Now, each member of the seventh roost is gifted with a magical ability that's under the theme of mentalism, like I said, which makes each member both attentive, logical, and sometimes cunning. The family home where the roost members live, except for estranged members like Reeve, is located in Rochester, New York, which actually I didn't remember until this actual moment, so I might have to go and revise some things. So let's talk about the virtues. There are 7 virtues that correlate to the 7 holy virtues and the 7 capital sins or deadly sins. So each bird has both a virtue and a sin, duality of man, or in this case, duality of bird. They are symbols of each family and also spiritual icons that look over each family like a guardian angel. Some roost members might treat their bird like a god. They are important beings. The virtues are immortal and the powerful epicenter of each family. Since virtues are immortal, they can't be killed, of course. And this becomes relevant later. Now, the family's gifts and lives are tied to the virtue, so if it dies, then so does everybody else in the roost. Now, virtues are extremely attractive birds. They have like iridescent feathers and they can range in size. I describe them as dramatically beautiful. I think that most of them look quite similar to ravens, but there are some that look like completely different species of birds. Now, they range in size, like humilitas, which is the 7th virtue, is the size of an eagle-ish, but looks like a raven. Charitas, who is the 3rd roosts. Charitas, who is the 3rd virtue, is like the size of a car, is how he's described. And then diligentia is the size of a budgie, and that is the 4th virtue. If you couldn't tell, they're just named after the Latin version of the holy virtue. Now, each virtue usually lives at the very large residence of the roosts, but the 7th virtue was so mad at what the 7th roost did to it that it flew away and hasn't been seen for many, many years. So let's talk about the characters, my babies. Okay, so first we have Harrison, who is 25 in this book. His power is pyrokinesis E. Depressed after his mother's sudden disappearance, Harrison chooses to shrink his world quite literally by forcing himself to relive the last week he saw her over and over. He's living in a time loop that he and his best friend Foster went into. We'll talk about Foster in a second. Harrison's sense of self is made even more precarious by his breakup with Lonan, partly caused by Harrison's poor communication skills, though his stubbornness withholds him from admitting how much their split has disrupted his life, which is typical to where he is in all my other projects. In the midst of what could be considered a quarter-life crisis, he's more than ready to keep living in a bland cycle, which mostly consists of watching movies and being unemployed. Sudden nightmares of Lonan, the only change in his life in a year, make his miserable life even worse. And desperate for a solution, he turns to his ex-friend Reeve in hopes of alleviating his stress, but when Reeve reveals the truth of her family and requests his help in saving Lonan, his overactive loyalty stirs a purpose in him that he hasn't experienced since his mom's disappearance. At first, Harrison is motivated to learn more about the world of the virtues, but as he uncovers the dark family secrets that put a target on his and his mother's backs, he must make the difficult decision of assisting Lonan and Reeve, who mean more to him than he realizes, or abandon them in exchange for a familiar but unfulfilling life. So Harrison I talk about, like I said, all the time on this channel. Some words that I've used to describe Harrison in the past: loyal, rational, empathetic, funny, giving, dependable, stubborn, begrudging. He is a great protagonist. He's funny. He's also serious, but a bit of like a class clown personality. He's also protective. Like I said in the description, he has an overactive sense of loyalty. And in my body back video, I said, if he loves loves you. He loves you, and it's true. He will love you for the rest of your life, unfortunately for him, even when he doesn't want to. So let's talk about Reeve. Reeve is 23 in 7th Virtue, and her ability is memory, control, and influence. She's so cool. Reeve in this book is a successful con woman and a mentalist empowered with the ability to influence the thought processes of others. So in this book, she's escaped a really toxic relationship with her ex-boyfriend Joel, and she's even less trusting now than she was before. Even less trusting than Harrison, who is the least trusting person ever. She's also even less generous. Reeve in this book, at least in the beginning, prefers apathy over empathy because at least apathy keeps her safe. But her disdain for others, even when earned, is easily tested when those she loves are in danger. Terrified for her brother's life, she teams up with Harrison and Foster in what she insists is a last resort to save him, but it's also an opportunity to mend her friendship with Harrison. What I didn't mention in the summary is that Harrison's mother going missing was also partly Reeve's fault. He blames both her and Lonan, and so this is kind of like Reeve's opportunity to redeem herself in Harrison's eyes. She is reclusive, persistent, observant, resourceful, aloof, and unemotional. Reeve was the narrator of the first 6 books of the Fostered series. She's a character that I knew very well, and then at one point in my life forgot how to write. I very much lost sight of who she was because in a lot of ways she was hiding from me, and 7th Virtue was a blessing for me because I was actually able to see her again and see her as this person who fiercely loves but is also terrified of being hurt. Now we have Lonan, who is also 25. He's Reeve's brother. They share a mother. His power is dream walking. He has something to do with dreaming. He used to be a lot more useful until he gave half his powers to Harrison. So he used to be able to kill people in their sleep, but like you wouldn't be able to tell what happened to them just because of the way that his magic works. But then he gave that up. So now he's just like a dreamy boy. He just like goes into your dreams and chills because he can't really do anything else besides that, which isn't great for what his family needs him for. He was originally born without magic, which was bad because he's a firstborn, and in this world, if you're a firstborn and you're not magical, you can't be the ace of your bloodline, and the ace of your bloodline, like the ace of a card deck, is the head of the family and very important. If he was not magical, his entire family would die with him, like his bloodline would just collapse. Right now in 7th Virtue, he's essentially a hitman. We don't actually see Lonan because he's not a point of view character. He might get a point of view in Sunless Ground. I don't know, vote in the comments. Because he has no magic, his mother merged him with their virtue when he was born, which is why he is immortal. Lonan's major goal in 7th Virtue is to remember the person he was before becoming that essential hitman, basically for his family, even if this was against his will. He's very good at killing people and doesn't want to be because, you know, he just wants to live a chill life. His whole thing in 7th Virtue is that he's made a terrible deal with his mom. He's like, okay, I will kill 3 people for you if you give me my mortality back. And the reason why he wants his mortality is because he has fallen in love with Harrison and he wants to spend the rest of his life with him and die with him. So Lonan is hopeless romantic. All of this happens because he just wants to die with Harrison, which is so Lonan. Of course he would make that decision, but he's a silent type to a fault. Like I said, hopeless romantic loser who I love very much. In this book, he actually is mentally stable, which we don't see that often, but he's actually doing relatively okay despite being like psychologically tortured by his family. He's literally stuck with his family that is hell-bent on exploiting his abilities. Now that he doesn't have that power anymore because he gave it to Harrison, he has not really been having a good time with his family. They are not happy with him. What little motivation that hasn't been broken in him by his family feels a need to protect what little he does have in his life. So that includes his sister, Reeve, but especially Harrison, which is so cute. He's the kind of guy who is like the mastermind, at least in this book. He kind of is aware of everything that's happening. He knows how to get himself out of tricky situations, and he's always the one to save everyone at the last minute, the last resort, which is so similar to how Lonan's psychology used to be in the original books when he was like the capital G government and led a team and everything. So it's been really fun to actually write Lonan's original personality back into the books. So he is logical, ambitious, introspective, impulsive, and of course romantic. I never thought of Lonan as a hopeless romantic, and then when I realized that he was, everything made so much more sense. So let's talk about Darren. Oh my god, my boy Darren. So Darren is 26. He is gifted with mapping and direction. Your boy can map. He's a cartographer. He is also Reeve's ex. Darren is the sweetest man alive and also the only normal person I have ever written in my life. But even he has his moments, you know, he's got some issues. Darren is a bit precarious in Seventh Virtue. His little brother Matthew has gone missing before the start of the book, which takes up a majority of his emotional real estate. He's also just rushed back into an engagement with his now fiance Jordan, who he's had like an on again, off again relationship with for many, many years. And that's sort of what happens when he and Reeve break up. And then all of a sudden in Seventh Virtue, Reeve tumbles back into his life. Darren is also a great friend. He's so giving. He's also so patient. Couple of the words I've used to describe him: sensible, focused, compassionate, generous, reliable, and maybe a little bit obsessive. When he gets an idea into his head, like, he really focuses on that, maybe to a fault. So let's talk about Foster. Foster is 24 and Harrison's best friend, also one of Reeve's best friends. He's a time traveler. I also call him my time loop king because that is his specialty. He can create time loops, which is how he managed to time loop him and Harrison into the same week over and over and over again for a year. Get you a best friend that will be like Foster and live the same week over and over just to make you feel better. He's also a morality is more important than my life kind of person. His roost in particular focuses heavily on ethics, and especially the ethics related to time and changing history. Foster is more of a green thumb than a fighter. A member of the now defunct Fourth Roost, he's stereotypically vegan, quinoa, tofu, nutritional yeast and all, which is like his personality in the original books. There's this whole running joke between him and Harrison, like that 13-year-old Rachel created about quinoa, which is still very accurate. He's also ready to settle down and continue selling plants from his and Harrison's apartment, but his need to be the mom friend of the group drives him to help Harrison with whatever he needs. Unfortunately, he loves Harrison more than anything. They are like brothers. Under the surface, though, his desire to learn more about what happened to his family, who mysteriously vanished years prior, still keeps him up at night, but he'll always prioritize Harrison first. Harrison is the most important thing in his life, and it's so cute. His words are kind, intuitive, wistful, unassuming, and practical. So now let's kind of talk about the other characters that aren't the main characters. Now, these are not all of the characters. They're just the ones that kind of show up the most. We have Joel, who I don't remember his age. He's either 28 or 29. All we have to know about Joel is that he sucks and that he's a terrible person, and I can't wait to kill him. But he is Reeve's terrible ex. Izzy is Lonan and Reeve's mother. She is in her 40s. She's ace of the household. She's a little maniacal. She was a villain like for a long time in the early Fostered books, and she's back. Her and Joel have created a bit of a partnership. So like I said, the ace of the household is the firstborn of a new generation and the head of the household. So Izzy takes her job very seriously, maybe because she has some crippling insecurities about how unpowerful she is as a person. Then we have Anna, who is younger than Lonan somehow. I figured out this timeline already. Lonan is the oldest in the family, and then Anna comes like really, really close after. I don't know what her exact age is, but I don't know. We'll figure it out. I had to change their birthdays in Seventh Virtue too, so we have no idea. But this is just kind of like, in general, she's relatively Lonan's age. She's a bit younger than him. We have Kate, who is Anna's girlfriend. She's 25 probably. She's like in one scene, but will probably show up later. And then we have Chris, who is Lonan and Reeve's youngest sibling, and they are 15. Now, out of the third roost is Darren's family, and they are the Petersons, and the Petersons are a big part of Seventh Virtue. And that's because Reeve and Harrison go to Darren at the Third Roost estate to see if Darren can help them find Humilitas and therefore find Lonan. We have Bev, who is one of the more important side characters. Like, she's gonna have, I think, an even bigger part in the second book. She is Darren's older sister. She's 28. We have Kit, who is 26 and Bev's girlfriend. Estelle, who's in her 40s, who is Darren's mother. Jordan, who is Darren's fiance. She is 27. She also has a brother who's not really that relevant, but anyway. We also have Matthew, who would be 15 in this book, and Matthew is Darren's youngest brother and the youngest sibling in the Petersons, like, immediate family. So here are the chapters. It also has many parts. I haven't titled the parts yet, so I did not include those in this bit, but the chapters all have titles. Chapter 1 is Play Again, 2, Memory Palace, 3, Hang Dry, 4, Fear 4, 5, entry point. 6, wax figure. 7, fever dream. 8, close friend. 9, blood relative. 10, new game. 11, safe sacrifice. 12, cracking wall. 13, Chartoss's garden. 14, foreign waters. 15, ash bone. 16, true gem, which is Reeve's chapter. 17, sunless ground. 18, rat experiment, which is Reeve's chapter. 19, half and half. 20, bloody hands. 21, dead doll, which is Reeve's chapter. 22, mobbing birds. 23, deep burial, which is also Reeve's chapter. 24, light buoy. 25, foil balloon, which again is Reeve's. 26, solemn promise. 27, hellish kingdom. 28, hollow point. 29, lurid violence, which is Reeve. 30, bloodless body. 31, first breakfast. 32, date night, which is Reeve. 33, mighty stranger, which is again Reeve. 34, wound within. 35, old habits, which is also Reeve. 36, blue blood. 37, gravity hill, which is in Reeve's point of view. 38, victory victory. 39, afterlife, but like afterlife, not the one word. 40, other face, which is Reeve's point of view. 41, bitter circle. 42, sand bottle, again in Reeve's point of view. 43, empty witness, also Reeve. 44, outside line, Reeve again. 45, vicious salvation. 46, grand finale, which I thought was satisfying because it is the final chapter in the book and it's a grand finale, which is based off of a piece of dialogue where Harrison's like, Lonan, are you here to kill me? Grand finale style, basically. So let's talk about music and inspiration. Harrison's music in general, all of it basically has to do with some sort of relationship he has with Lonan. I do have playlists for both Harrison, Reeve, and their besties playlist, which I will link in the description. The main Seventh Virtue song is Opera by Surf Curse. The lyrics, it hurts so much to close my eyes, but I never want to watch you die. The plot, is this the plot? And I'd rather make myself go blind than stare into your dying eyes, so I'll close mine. Oh my god. May or may not happen many times in the book. You know, both of them die several times, or almost die many times. Palladium by Grace and Chance, which I started listening to right as I was finishing Seventh Virtue, which was perfect. This would be the end credit song. The lyrics are both Harrison's relationship with Reeve and Harrison's relationship with Lonan. Originally I was like, this is so Harrison and Lonan, and then I was like, wait, it's also Harrison and Reeve. Some of the most important lyrics are, I just want to try to protect you like your skin protects your blood, Lonan and Harrison. I just want to keep you safe the way the Force keeps her young, Harrison and Reeve. And if I ever let you go, then my whole kingdom's done. I hold to your heart like it's palladium. Oh my god, so good. You guys gotta listen to that song. And then shout out, because I didn't have a Lonan section, but Your Blood by Nothing But Thieves is just Lonan. Like, at face value, that song is just literally what he's going through. Reeve has a couple songs. The Giver by Sarah Kinsley, which is pretty much like exclusively what I was listening to toward the end of writing this book. The lyrics, but I'm a giver and he's immune. He's hungry for someone but doesn't know who. I'm a giver, he's the moon. And I reach and I reach and I forgive the girl who loved you. Girl, Reeve, you need a hug. Caught Up in a Dream by Sarah Kinsley also is so Raven, which is Darren and Reeve's ship name. But anyway, the lyrics that I loved there. So who am I? Who am I in your memory? What am I? What am I when you look at me? What do you see? And then we have Magic by Julia Jacqueline, which is so Reeve. The Besties songs, like the Harrison and Reeve songs, we've got two, which is Be Careful With Yourself by Julia Jacqueline. There's also the lyrics at the end of that song, which is From Now On in You, I Put All My Trust. Now that I know there's nobody coming to save us, which is so them because they're the ones who have to save each other, which is awesome. And then Any Human Friend by Marika Hackman is their song. I hear that song and I'm like, my babies. So let's get in some excerpts for Seventh Virtue. So this is the Harrison excerpt. This is a little gory. Content warning. Don't blink when in an instant none of this, the lake, the bodies, is there. When all there is in sight is a bird heaving in the center of a concrete room. Approach him, know him, and quickly. His black feathers so slick they gloss indigo in the single floodlight fluorescing him. Notice he's injured. Notice he has hands, fingers, that he grips something small, polished. Notice the blood, how it gels everything. His skin, feathers, the floor. Notice how he holds it all. The knife, the blood, his skin, the feathers, the floor. Ooh, what's happening? We'll never know. And then this is the Reeve point of view excerpt, which is about Lonan. In the end, it's Lonan who pulled her off the cabin's floor. Lonan who took her wrist, punctured from where she'd fallen onto an exposed nail in the floorboards. Lonan who applied pressure and told her to count to 100. Lonan who rushed her through the woods where they came, Lonan who reminded her that bleeding is okay, that it means you're alive, Lonan who took the key card from her pocket, Lonan who pushed them both back into the motel room, Lonan who guided her wrist under the bathroom sink and rinsed till the water went pinkish, Lonan who tore open a box of bandages from the room safety kit, Lonan who covered the wound, Lonan who looked her in the eye, this shy, sad boy, and told her he was sorry they were here, related, in this situation, on this vacation, their mother gone, their father's different, their circumstances probably similar regardless. Lonan who sat her on the bed and crouched in front of her, Lonan who said, his voice as confident as she'd heard it that entire evening, that with him she'd be safe, that if he couldn't stop her from getting hurt, he'd always do his best to help her up. Okay, Q&A time, the most fun part of this video. I asked you guys to send me in questions for 7th Virtue, and the first one is, who's your favorite character? Rapid fire, the answer is Harrison. I love him so much. Check out my Feeding Habits All About My Novel video where I just spewed my love for this man, but he is my favorite thing ever. He's got this hilarious voice that is just so addictive to write, and I don't think I'll ever stop writing in his point of view because he's just so funny. And he's also serious, he's reflective, he's emotional, he cries a lot. I love him. He's the best. I mean, I have his earring. Like, everything about me is trying to emulate Harrison. He's the best. Have your feelings toward any of your characters changed after writing this? Well, I mean, number one, I love Harrison, and I think writing this project allowed me to love him even more. I was able to see more of his goofy side, because in the more literary books, obviously, he's not going to be making a whole bunch of jokes about capitalism because it just doesn't fit the tone. Though he can. Maybe he can. But I'm grateful for this project again because I would never have written so many of these characters if it weren't for 7th Virtue. I had stopped writing with Reeve, I'd stopped writing with Darren and Foster, and they would have all died in the old projects if they hadn't been put back into this one. And now they all get to live on, and now I get to know them so much better. So the feelings that have changed is that I love them all so much again, and I know them so much better than I ever have. Since you said you're a body writer, how do you associate yourself / put yourself into characters who are so fantastical and obviously not relatable to your life? Well, a big part of this is that 7th Virtue takes place in modern world. Like, it could take place in 2023. Started writing it in 2021. Could start in 2021, like minus the pandemic. I also know the characters outside of this project, so they're not just fantasy characters to me. And body writing for me is all about pure empathy, and I can do pure empathy whether or not the characters are magical. How different was it to write your characters in a magical setting as opposed to a realistic one? Do you think their powers were just an extension of their psychology, or did it really change something about them? I don't know how you decided to handle it in the book, but just the fact that Lonan is a bird seems significant for his identity, of course. It was just fun because I got to make them have magical powers that they can use, like against each other and for each other, and I find that part of the action really fun. Obviously, Foster started out as genre fiction, so it's actually nice to go back to genre fiction where they can like now physically protect each other rather than like emotionally protect each other, which is how they've sort of been functioning in the literary books. I'm not sure actually if any of them have a power that's actually relevant to their psychology, except for Lonan. Lonan's being like killing is very him, but the others kind of just got thrown the power that would work best for the plot, to be honest. Maybe Reeves is relevant to her psychology because she kind of can be a manipulative person. I wanted to comment on the fact that Lonan is a bird. Well, his name means blackbird, and so I've always associated with him being a bird. So naturally, when I was like, well, what's the power that Lonan's gonna have? Like way back in 2018, I was like, well, he's a bird, obviously. That was just the first thing that came to my mind, which is funny because if I ever met this man in person, I am terrified of birds. So if he looked like a bird, I would run far, far, far away. Your girl bought this ring, which is like wings, which some people get, you know, for memorial reasons, and I got for my stupid book. But this ring is sort of just to memorialize Lonan and then also the virtues in general. How did you manage to bring your characters into a fantasy setting? Did it add something to their character development? I have gotten this comment a couple of times where people are like really amazed that I managed to like sort of like take these characters and like put them wherever. I think like I didn't really think about it when it came to bringing them into a fantasy setting because I know them very well again. Like they're just characters that I know how to write in whatever situation. I could probably write them in any genre at this point because I know them them that well, but it might not be that easy if, you know, you didn't know these characters for like 10 years, but that's how long that I've been writing them, and they've already been in many different genres, so I'm quite comfortable with molding them to different scenarios. What made you decide to keep writing with the Fostered Gang, and will you ever stop? What made you decide to keep writing with them was autism. They're my special interest. My biggest special interest is my characters, so I'm naturally just gonna write about them a lot because I love them so much. Will I ever stop? No, because many times I have thought, and there are videos, like you can find me on this channel crying, thinking that I'll never be able to write with them again. As a teenager, I always thought like, okay, well, I need to finish Fostered eventually. Like, I need to stop writing this. I need to like move on. I need to grow up. And that was so not true. Write what you love. If you love writing with the same characters, just write with them for the rest of your life. Like, it's not gonna hurt anybody. What is gonna help you is writing stuff that you love. And I love these characters so much. I'm never gonna give them up. Can you see your fostered characters in stories in other genres? Absolutely. I wrote a literary fiction short story called Holiday based off of a chapter in Seventh Virtue, which is in Reeve's point of view. So, you know, she's already doing her thing. Reeve has her own literary fiction book called Houses with Teeth. Harrison has his literary fiction series, and, you know, Lonan's also narrator, which is Moth Work, Feeding Habits, Body Back. They've already been in many different genres. They've been in dystopian. They have been in like dystopian literary. Like, they have followed me through a lot, so they could certainly be in other genres. This question was so fun. How different is Lonan and Harrison's dynamic from your Moth Work duology in this novel, or is it similar? Was their relationship an easier part of writing this novel, or was it quite challenging? So to answer the first part, the relationship is like the healthiest it's ever been in Seventh Virtue. And I made a joke in my Body Back video, you know, despite the murder and the bloodshed, you know, crying. It's very good, I think, in Seventh Virtue, because they are actually a couple in Seventh Virtue. They have a very different origin story. They don't meet in the same way that they did in the previous books, because like I said, this is an alternate universe, so they don't have to. From the beginning, they're flirting with each other when they first meet, so like it's not like how it was originally when they were like so slow burn enemies to lovers vibes that took like 5 books for them to even get to a point where there was an inkling of romance. So that has been very different. Obviously they're older, so I think they're a bit more settled with themselves and their internal conflicts. So the conflicts that exist in Moth Work and Feeding Habits don't exist here as much because they've both done a lot of character development off of the page. And again, they have different lives than they did in the other books. They are actually a couple also in Seventh Virtue, like canonically a couple, in comparison to Moth Work and Feeding Habits, where they are kind of a couple, but like we never actually officially get that. So that's very different, where they never really fully decided what they were or what they weren't. It was quite gray area, but they're actually dating in Seventh Virtue. It was challenging in a different way in comparison to the other books like Moth Work, because they were like in a healthy relationship. Like, they're not where they are in those other books. They also only have 5 scenes together in this entire book. Believe it or not, the whole book that's about Harrison and Lonan, they are alone in a room together 5 times, and that's excluding flashbacks and these dream sequences where they frequently talk to each other in dreams. But like the in-person scenes, there are only 5. Maybe I'll see more differences in book 2 because I really didn't write them that much. The next questions are based on process. You've said in the past that writing this novel was really fast. Was it hard to push forward without looking back, or were you confident enough in the writing to not edit as you wrote? This wasn't really much about confidence so much as it was about belief when I was drafting. I didn't really need to be confident that what I was writing was good, because I wasn't. Most of the time I was like, this is shit. Really, the belief was what mattered. The belief that that didn't matter in this process, because that wasn't the point of writing this book. The belief that I would eventually revise this anyway. All of the excerpts that I've shared with you, most of them on this channel, are completely unedited first drafts. Same with the ones that I shared earlier in this video. It's just the belief that I could continue to draft that allowed me to push forward without looking back. Not really that I was confident in what I was doing. What was your favorite part to write? Oh my gosh, I loved writing all of Seventh Virtue, which is not something I can say for a majority of my books, but like genuinely, I loved every single moment. Even the moments I hated, they weren't nearly as bad as moments in other books, and that can't happen with every single book you write. That's not gonna happen. It's not realistic, but when it does, like, hang on to those moments. But in particular, I loved the sequence when Lonan comes back into the book. So it spans from about chapters 15 to 35, and that was mostly NaNoWriMo NaNoWriMo chapters. It was the best time I've had writing ever. Like really, I try to compare how much fun I had writing to this one weekend where my family and I drove up to New York City and I wrote 12,000 words of book 3 of Fostered in like 2 days. I've always tried to beat that, like the amount of fun I had on that weekend. And I think this whole section, it was about like October and November of writing Seventh Virtue, was just a magnificent experience. What was your favorite scene to write and why? Also, can you read it out? Because I'm in love with your style of writing. First of all, thank you very much. My favorite scenes to write, it was so hard to pick. There are a couple of cabin sequences with Darren. Darren has a cabin that he built himself on his family's property. Harrison and Darren have a Darren's cabin sequence in chapter 26, Solemn Promise. And Reeve and Darren have a Darren's cabin sequence in chapter 33, which is Mighty Stranger. So basically Darrison and Raven supremacy, because I love them so much. But especially Darrison. Anything where it's Darren and Harrison having a conversation is just so funny because Darren is such like a normal, level-headed guy. You know, he also likes Harrison's humor, but at the same time he's like, man, can you just be serious for once? Harrison has this really funny bit with Darren where he finds Darren like very physically attractive, so they kind of riff off of each other. But I've been having like a lot of fun making their friendship because I actually don't remember what their friendship was like in the original books. I don't remember one scene where it was just the two of them or where, you know, the two of them interacted. I know Darren and Lonan had like a good like a bromance going on in the original books, but not Darren and Harrison. So it was a lot of fun to see Harrison, who really didn't like Darren because he was like, who are you to Reeve? Like, if you're gonna mess with Reeve emotionally, I will mess with your face, is how Harrison came into the relationship, coming in a little bit hot. And then by the end of it, he's like, Darren, you know, I would marry you if you weren't gonna marry everybody else in this book. This is an excerpt from the Darrison cabin sequence. Harrison approaches the stove and checks the can of ravioli with his bare hands, which is a stupid idea because the metal is hot and he's snatching his hand back with a yowl. So now he's embarrassed and charred. A fantastic, sexy combination. Your entire family's becoming more and more predictable to me. Harrison yanks the tin off the element with the edge of his t-shirt, cursing, and then retrieves the 2 forks he managed to locate inside a creaking chest of drawers in the corner. Like a reverse Arthur, he stabs the forks into the ravioli, tired of this Excalibur shit, tired of being the hero. I shared that before, I just can't remember where. I think it was in my 2022 writing wrap-up. Then this is the Raven romance sort of happening. The Reeve and Darren in the cabin, which was one of the best days I've had writing in a really long time, and I will never forget that day. It was so good. I filmed me doing it for a short, which is great because it was such a good day. She circles his nail beds, admires his smooth cuticles, repeats. He lets out a shallow breath, this man who spent all of yesterday playing rounds and rounds of Boggle and Clue with her, who read to her last night, his voice quiet as he said, if all else perished and he remained, I should still continue to be, and if all else remained and he were annihilated, the universe would turn to a mighty stranger. She thinks of that quote now as she touches Darren. What if he were to disappear at this moment too? Would the universe be a stranger to her? That is a reference to Wuthering Heights, which is kind of just like a reference to the original books because Reeve and Darren have this thing in book 6 of Fostered, which I wrote, I think, starting in 2017, where he is like trying to make a library for this HQ that they live at. Wuthering Heights is like this big conversation that they have kind of back and forth, probably because I had to read Wuthering Heights around that time. What was the most difficult section / scene to draft? Oh my god, the party. There's this gala, the Winter Solstice Gala that the Petersons host, and it was a party that I knew was gonna happen from the very beginning of time in this book, but there was so much action that it felt so different to sort of the intimate ensemble cast moments that I'd been building pretty much from like chapters 15 to 35, those chapters I really liked. So I found writing that really, really uncomfortable because it was just not at all what I was used to. I also felt like I'd ended an era and I missed the era a lot. But also just like emotionally speaking, writing chapters 42 to 44, which is that section in Reeve's point of view, was super isolating and a little like emotionally difficult for me. I have a whole video talking about it. It was about writing trauma. And yeah, it was such a hard space to be in. It spanned all of my January and I didn't realize how much it had been affecting me. So like actually physically speaking, that was the moment that affected me most. Was there a scene that surprised you? Well, the very end of the book surprised me quite last minute too. I was not expecting the direction it took. Essentially, I ended up hitting a beat that was supposed to be the final scene, like much earlier in the book. I hit it like a chapter before. So I wasn't sure where the book would end. Now it was supposed to end on a very different note where Harrison like felt betrayed by Lonan, but it ends on a very sad note where he actually finds comfort in Lonan at the very end. Oh my God. The ending of Seventh Virtue is the worst in terms of being emotional. But I added this bit about Harrison. Like, he essentially, like, the squad gets split up and Harrison is watching Reeve go at the end of Seventh Virtue, and he's like feeling really hurt by, like, I mean, this is what he wants. This is what he has done for her, to help her, to protect her, because that's his job in his head. But it's hard for him because they've grown so close in Seventh Virtue that having to say goodbye to her is like an impossible task for him, which is why Lonan is there, thank God. Do you remember the moment when the idea came together and it all clicked? For me, this was when in the very early phases of brainstorming the magic system. My sister and I were like in our basement and I was like writing on my iCloud. Everything fell into place the minute I sort of figured out like there would be like a tarot element and there would be the birds element, and I searched up the virtues and the sins or whatever. All of it like just converged in that one conversation that we had. I remember that was the moment where I was like, this is what this book is. And we figured out the conflict and everything at that moment. And I won't forget that either. It was just so important for me. How did you fix all the plot holes and come up with new and fresh ideas? The answer is I did not. There are so many plot holes. There are so many issues I have to fix. But I sort of amended this by creating a things to revise document. When you're pantsing a fantasy novel and you've never written fantasy before, things are gonna come up, just naturally speaking. So I ended up going and making a list of things that I had to change later instead of spending a whole bunch of time and ruining my momentum by changing them as I went. How did you come up with the idea of basing the families on the 7 virtues or sins? So I hinted at this earlier, but it was from the title. I would never have come up with this entire concept if it wasn't for the title 7th virtue. I was like, okay, 7th virtue, so then there must be the other virtues, then what is a virtue? And when I came up with what a virtue was, I was like, I have the book. Were you ever insecure writing in a genre you aren't used to, especially fantasy? I think in the beginning, like world building it, especially because Harrison knows nothing about the world, so then has to have this like long conversation with Reeve. It's like the typical like, here's an info dump chapter. Yeah, that was maybe a moment where I was like, I'm doing this wrong, but I never took it too personally because I knew this project was just for me. I knew it was just an exploration and I knew it was supposed to be fun. But I wouldn't say I'm a great fantasy writer. This is the first fantasy book I've ever written. I'm sure the more that I do it, the better I'll get, which is why it's important to me that I'm now exploring other genres because I don't want to just kind of stick to one thing anymore. Were you screaming while writing the end? Or were you calmly staring at the screen, sipping your tea, unable to comprehend what was happening? Because I know I was screaming. Okay, the answer is I cannot confirm or deny. I may or may not have been in class when I wrote the ending of this book, may or may not. So there definitely wasn't any screaming physically, but there was a moment where I definitely may or may not, while I was in class, set down my pen and was just like, I just finished this book. Do you plan on writing in the fantasy genre again apart from 7th Virtue, the sequel? Yes, I actually love fantasy. I love it very much. And if I were to ever write something for publication, I feel like I would probably enjoy doing genre fiction, YA genre fiction more than literary fiction, but we'll see. This is the reason why I'm having a bit of a crisis with my writing identity because I don't really know. I'm just trying to write the stuff that I enjoy. So if another fantasy idea comes up, I'll absolutely write it. Any hints on what happens at the climax scene without spoilers, please? I don't mind spoiling the ending, but I'll keep it relatively vague-ish. There are 3 climaxes kind of in 7th Virtue, which was an oopsie on my part, but the ball scene is the main one. The whole squad basically is toast at that scene. Literally may or may not be toast either because Harrison may or may not be like burning the whole room down. But anyway, also later, Harrison may or may not get stabbed repeatedly in the later climax with Lonan just watching him die, may or may not. The people on Tumblr already know this is not a secret. What themes are most prominent in 7th Virtue? I would say learning to trust, forgiveness, and accepting and embracing change are the biggest ones. The change one is a huge deal because Harrison doesn't want to change anything about his life at the beginning and then is like, fine, I'll do it. Whatever, or if you really want me to change, I'll do it, is kind of his vibe. You once said that you use a lot of religious symbolism. How about this book? Does it contain your beliefs about spirituality or is it pure fantasy? Do you have any connections to Christianity? Is it why you chose a 7 sins and virtues motif or just cool factor? It was not just cool factor. Yes, I grew up a Catholic. I am no longer a Catholic. I am an atheist. I wouldn't say that the book contains my beliefs on spirituality. I mean, there are points where Harrison will talk about gods because he is also an atheist, which is just sort of a thing he does anyway. But I would not say that it is a religious book by any means. Like, I wouldn't say that it is like Christian fiction, not at all. Like, oh gosh. But no, it wasn't just cool factor. It is also based off of, obviously, like sort of the religious aspects too. But you see a lot of books about the deadly sins, and it's the capital sins. So I wanted to also switch it and talk about the virtues. You don't see the virtues as often. Why don't you want to publish this book? So the simple answer is that I no longer quantify the value of a book I'm writing based off of whether I publish it or not. I now base that on whether I enjoyed it or not, like whether I enjoyed writing it. I don't know if people will believe me when I say this, but genuinely, this is not a book like in this state that would be readable to people that don't already know the project very well. It's really just supposed to be something for me, so I'm just trying to keep it that way. Would you ever self-publish or traditionally publish Seventh Virtue or any future work? In terms of Seventh Virtue, no, I wouldn't self-publish it. What would the Seventh Virtue fandom be named? I thought this is a really cute question. You guys can decide, because I think it's really cool. Like, one thing about having a YouTube audience is that there are people who actually are invested in my books when I don't have to publish them, which I think is really nice. And if you do like my characters, you've ever said something nice about them, thank you. Really, I appreciate it. Maybe the ultimate roost, you know, because it has to be something roost related, because the roosts are the family, and you know, you guys are my YouTube family, so I don't know. You guys are, you decide in the comments. I am very happy that people feel like there could even be a fandom, which I don't know, it's a very cool experience for me. And finally, how did this book change your perspective of things in your own life, even if the change came in small details? This book, oh my gosh, means so much to me. I talked about it a lot in the vlog where I finished it, but what it taught me is I can be happy and write again. 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 That's all I've been thinking over the last 2 years. It has been an amazing experience to draft this book. I'm such a different writer than I was when I started this. Writing was difficult for me. It impacted my mental health to quite, extreme ways. Like, it wasn't just oh, well, I'm not feeling good about this. It was very personal, and I took it very seriously when my writing wasn't going the way I wanted it. And I found no joy in writing, but also writing was the only thing that would make me happy. So how can you be happy if the thing that makes you happy is making you unhappy, is a question that I had to start contending with. And it's one of the big reasons I wrote Seventh Virtue, because I was trying to kind of reconnect, as people say, kind of like reconnect with my inner child, reconnect with the things that used to make me happy. I don't care about writing badly anymore. I mean, like, I used to be very hesitant to share anything that wasn't perfect or anything that didn't look impressive to my viewers, whether, it's on here or on my blog. And now I don't care. I'm like, it's fine if you think that this writing is bad. I love it, so it doesn't matter. I prioritize fun now, and that's what matters most to me, not the quality of my prose or whatever. Like, I got very hidey and like all up in my head back when I started writing this book in 2021. So to be in a different space, I feel like a very different person. I'm not as insecure as I once was. Sometimes I'll read something in Seventh Virtue and be like, that is written poorly. I don't feel good about that, but I don't take it seriously anymore. And I'm able to see aspects of the work that I love. And that is something that I was not able to do before. So it has changed my life tremendously. You wouldn't think that, just writing a book could do that, but it actually has so much. This book is responsible for making me a much more confident person, and I'm very happy that I had the opportunity to write it, because if I'd been on the same path that I was, if I just continued to be a bit of a genre snob for the rest of my life, I feel like I might have quit writing altogether, which, I was quite close to doing at points. So thank you, Seventh Virtue. You have been here for a very long time, and so have you, viewers at home, because this video is very long, but let me know what you think of Seventh Virtue in the comments. I'm really excited to revise it. Everybody on my bookbinder video wanted to see me bind Seventh Virtue, which I might actually do with the big unedited version, so I can kind of memorialize this draft that really did change my life. I'd love to be able to hold it even if it changes a lot when I edit it, and I'm looking forward to actually revising it maybe in a couple of months. If you were in this world, which roost would you like to be in? And then also, out of the characters that I mentioned, who would you be friends with? I think I would like, obviously, to be friends most with Harrison because he's a bit of a crowd favorite, but you know, he's mine first and foremost. So if you're gonna say Harrison, get in line. But let me know in the comments. Thanks so much for watching this video, and I'll see you guys in another one. Bye. So you've made it to the end of this very, very long video, basically feature film, and this is the second installment for special uploads for Autism Acceptance Month. I wanted to do a quick shout out for some social media accounts, particularly on Instagram, that I found very useful as I'm trying to do my bit as an autistic person. And also, I mean, the whole video was very autism of me, which, you know, I hope you enjoyed. Anyway, I will link my favorite accounts for Instagram in the description. These were really useful accounts for me when I first started learning and understanding my diagnosis, and they made me feel a whole lot better and made me go, wow, I wish I'd found this many, many years ago. So I hope this is a useful resource for you if you are autistic, or if you know somebody who is autistic. They usually have really great posts across the board and from a ton of different creators. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next week, I hope, because I'm moving. So if you don't see me, that's why. Okay, bye.